I never in my wildest dreams expected that a straightforward business trip would completely transform my life. When I was 34 years old, I was living in Vancouver, where my life appeared to be steady and ideal. At the time, my husband, Ryan, and I had been married for 8 years. And despite the fact that our relationship had its ups and downs, we were happy. At least, that was what I told myself. Ryan was a devoted individual who always placed his work ahead of everything else. As a result, he was frequently absent on business trips, which meant that I was responsible for managing things at home on my own. During one of these journeys, everything began to shift in a different direction. During his time in the city, Ryan held the position of senior project manager for a reputable architecture enterprise. A man named Mr. Blake, who was his supervisor, was someone I had only encountered a few times at work gatherings. With silver hair, a robust build, and an aura of authority that commanded respect, he was in his early 50s. He was also a man of powerful physique. He was known to be strong but fair, the kind of boss who wanted the most from his staff and wasn't afraid to push them to accomplish it. He gave his people the opportunity to succeed. I had never given him much attention beyond the fact that he was kind to me, despite the fact that his presence was scary. I received an unexpected phone call one evening, while Ryan was away on a particularly lengthy trip to Toronto. The call came in the middle of the night. It turned out to be Mr. Blake. The tone of his voice was composed and professional, yet there was an underlying tension that I was unable to pinpoint. He began by saying, "Good evening, Mrs. Reynolds," in a tone that was official. "I hope that I am not causing you any hassle." To my astonishment, he said, "No, not at all." I was surprised to hear from him. "Is everything all correct?" He reassured me. "There is absolutely no reason to be concerned about anything. I just wanted to talk about something that is related to Ryan. Although it is not an urgent matter, I believe that it would be most beneficial if we could meet in person. Do you have any plans for tomorrow evening?" I was dubious of the reason why he would want to meet with me rather than Ryan directly, so I made a brief pause before proceeding. As a result, I accepted because I didn't want to appear impolite. "That looks good to me," she said. "If we were to meet, where would you like?" He made the suggestion that there is a restaurant in the downtown area that he believed would be appropriate. The Belle Époque period. Have you heard of it? It didn't matter that he couldn't see me. I still nodded. A high-end French restaurant famed for its fine cuisine and cozy atmosphere. La Belle Époque was established in the early 20th century. I did not challenge the decision, despite the fact that it seemed like a strange pick for a business meeting. "I am aware of it, yes. At 7 o'clock, I will be there." He said the word perfect, with a slight lowering of his speech. "Mrs. Reynolds, I'll see you tomorrow," she said. "Have a pleasant evening." Immediately after I hung up the phone, I was overcome with a feeling of anxiety. Despite Mr. Blake's best efforts, I couldn't shake the notion that there was more going on in this meeting than he was letting on. On the other hand, I managed to dismiss the idea by convincing myself that I was merely being overly cautious. Given that he was Ryan's employer, there was no reason to think that he was doing anything out of the ordinary. My choice of attire for the following evening was deliberate, and I went with a black dress that was understated yet sophisticated, since I believed it would be suitable for the event. Upon my arrival at the restaurant, I was met by a kind and welcoming hostess who guided me to a quiet table located in the vicinity of the rear of the room. At the moment that I approached, Mr. Blake was already there, standing there with a friendly smile on his face. Holding out his hand, he greeted me with the name Reynolds. "I am grateful that you agreed to meet with me." My response was, "It's not a problem at all," and I offered to shake his hand. "Emily, if you please, is my name." The smile on his face grew wider as he repeated, "Emily, would you kindly take a seat?" During the time that he was signaling for the waiter to bring us a bottle of wine, I sat down and felt a little bit more at peace. In the course of our idle chatter, I realized that I was able to relax, and the initial tightness began to dissipate. As Mr. Blake was charming and easy to chat to, I started to question whether or not I had made an incorrect assessment of the scenario. Immediately following the completion of the wine pouring and the departure of the waiter, Mr. Blake leaned in slightly. his demeanor becoming more solemn. When it comes to Emily, I want to tell you the truth. I am concerned about Ryan, which is why I asked to meet with you tonight. I hope we can take some time together. The question, "Is he okay?" caused my heart to skip a beat, and I felt a surge of fear coming over me. How are things going? I was reassured by Mr. Blake that he was in good physical health, but I've observed that he has been experiencing a great deal of stress as of late. I am concerned that he is beginning to feel the effects of the increased workload and duties that he has been taking on. He has been working harder than ever before. With a nod, I indicated that I understood what he was saying. Over the course of the preceding year, Ryan had gotten even more engrossed in his profession, despite the fact that he had always been a diligent worker. In the course of his profession, it was not unusual for him to stay at the office well into the night or even on the weekends. I had attempted to have a conversation with him about it, but he consistently dismissed my worries and said that he was doing everything perfectly. There was a hint of exasperation in my tone as I stated, "I've attempted to communicate with him, but he is not going to listen. It's just that he constantly pushing himself to do better." The intensity in Mr. Blake's gaze continued as he stated, "That is precisely what worries me. The fact that Ryan is exhausting himself is a problem because he is one of the greatest project managers that we have. It's never a good thing to happen, and I've seen it happen before. Since of this, I wanted to chat to you since I believe that you are the only person who can communicate with him." As soon as I realized that I had not been able to get in touch with Ryan and that I had not been successful in persuading him to slow down, I experienced a twinge of remorse. However, there was something more about Mr. Blake's tone that made me feel uneasy, and it reminded me of something else. With a trembling voice, I responded, "I'll give it a shot, but I'm not sure if he'll pay attention to what I have to say either." It came as a surprise to me when Mr. Blake leaned across the table and placed his hand on mine. "Emily, you are his wife," he said. "You get to know him better than anyone else. If there is anyone who can assist him, it is you." The warmth of his hand and the firmness of his touch made it impossible for me to draw away from him. There was something in his gaze that excited my heart in a manner that it hadn't done in a very long time. It was something that made my heart beat. Even though I was aware that I ought to move my hand and break the contact, I was unable to do so. I had the sensation of being frozen, as if I was stuck in a moment that I did not make complete sense of. When I finally spoke, my voice was hardly audible above a whisper. "Thank you," I whispered. "It is quite kind of you to be concerned." The hold that Mr. Blake had on my hand became ever so slightly more firm, and I had a chill that ran down my spine. When he started speaking to me, his voice was low and filled with an intensity that I couldn't quite describe. "Emily, there's something else I need to say," he said. I turned my head to gaze at him, my heart thumping fast in my chest. "What exactly is it?" He seemed to be considering what he was going to say for a brief moment. "Emily, you are an excellent example of a woman. Bold, brilliant, and stunningly lovely. Being in your presence is a blessing for Ryan." As a result of his words, I blinked, taken aback. I stutteringly said, Thank you," as I was at a loss for words. He fixed his focus on me, and the intensity of his gaze made it impossible for me to turn away from him. The tone of his voice became more gentle as he continued, "But I can't help but wonder if he truly appreciates what he has." It appeared as though the air between us became more dense, creating an environment that was packed with an unspoken tension that caused my heart rate to rise. "It is Mr. Blake. I am completely confused by what you are attempting to convey," I mumbled, my voice shaking slightly. With his thumb lightly brushing across the back of my hand, he corrected me by saying, instead of calling me Andrew, "Emily, I believe that you are aware of this. I believe that you are fully aware of what it is that I am attempting to convey." In spite of the fact that I was experiencing a surge of dread, I was also aware of something else, something that was mysterious and more attractive. With a trembling voice, I uttered, "This is not correct. Ryan was hired by your company. As for me, I am his wife." According to Andrew's response, I know, his voice was laced with sadness. "However, I am unable to deny how I am feeling, Emily. Because you are everything I've ever desired, The idea of you being miserable is something I can't bear to contemplate. Because I wanted to put an end to this discourse before it got any farther, I wanted to pull my hand away from my face. The truth of the matter was, however, that there was a portion of me that was pulled to him. A portion of me that yearned for the attention and the yearning that I observed in his eyes. At the same time that my voice was filled with fear and need, I muttered to Andrew, "Andrew, we can't do this." With his hand still on mine, he whispered, "We don't have to do anything you don't want to do." And he repeated this statement. "But I need you to understand how I am feeling. It is imperative that you are aware of the fact that if circumstances were different, if you were not married." There was a whirlwind of feelings churning inside of me, including remorse, desire, and perplexity. My pulse was racing in my chest. I was aware that this was inappropriate and that I ought to get up and leave, but I was unable to do so. Despite my best efforts, I was unable to break free of the present moment. In an effort to persuade myself just as much as I was attempting to persuade him, I repeated, "I'm married. It is the same with you." It was clear that he was in pain as he nodded. "You are correct, but that does not alter the way I feel. Additionally, I do not believe that it alters the way that you feel." While I was looking into his eyes, I was looking for any indication of uncertainty. Nevertheless, all I saw was sincerity. Even though he meant every word, I was horrified by his words. Due to the fact that, in reality, I did feel something for him, even if it was something that I had no right to feel. Despite the fact that my voice was shaking, I added, "This isn't fair to Ryan. He has faith in you. And I don't want to betray that trust," Andrew responded, his eyes remaining fixed on mine throughout the answer. "However, I am unable to pretend that there is no connection between us. I am unable to neglect this." The fact that I was standing on the brink of a cliff made me aware of the fact that a single misstep could bring everything crashing down around me. However, the draw was too strong, and the temptation was too considerable. I found myself leaning in, my lips meeting his in a tentative kiss, and before I could stop myself, I found myself pressing my lips against his. Although it was only a moment long, the kiss was powerful enough to send a surge of electricity through my body. As soon as we separated, both of us were breathing heavily and our hearts were beating really fast. "Emily," Andrew murmured, his voice brimming with the sorrow he was feeling. "I don't want to put any pressure on you. However, I need to know whether or not you like this." Despite the fact that my head was a tornado of contradictory feelings, I gazed at him. I was aware that this was inappropriate and that I ought to decline, but I was unable to find the words to express my disapproval. Instead, I indicated my agreement with a nod, tears beginning to spring up in my eyes as I revealed the truth to both myself and to him. "Yes," I mumbled, my voice shaking slightly as I did so. "Yes, I am." The sense of relief that flowed over his face was apparent, and he reached out to cup my cheek with a loving touch. His voice was quiet as he said, "We'll take it slow. There is no compulsion for us to rush into anything. Just to demonstrate to you how much you mean to me, I would like to be in close proximity to you." The evening proceeded, and the talk continued to change between themes that were light-hearted and things that were more serious, but the tension remained strong. The situation was very similar to that of walking a tightrope, in which we were attempting to keep our balance while being aware that a single misstep could send us both plunging into chaos. Andrew was adamant about driving me back to my house when it was time for me to depart. Although I was aware that I ought to have declined and should have phoned a taxi, I was unable to muster the courage to say no. Both of us were immersed in our own thoughts for the entire drive, which was filled with a tense stillness. The instant we arrived at my flat, he escorted me to the door as his hand lingered on mine for a fraction of a second longer than it should have. "I want to express my gratitude for tonight," he remarked in a hushed voice. "I really hope that we will be able to talk again very soon." I nodded, my heart continuing to beat rapidly. "The night is over, Andrew." I leaned against the door as I shut it behind me, my mind racing with everything that had occurred up until that point. I knew that I was putting everything on the line for a fleeting moment of desire, and I knew that I was playing with fire. On the other hand, the reality was that I felt more alive than I had in years, and not only did that make me excited, but it also made me feel afraid. Over the course of the subsequent several days, I was unable to stop thinking about Andrew, including his touch, his words, and the way he had provoked feelings within me. I attempted to concentrate on my life and my work, but it was impossible for me to do so. The night was constantly repeating over and over in my head, and I had the sensation that I was going about in a trance. The following day, in the afternoon, I got a text message from him. "I must come and see you. Can we get together tonight?" While I was reading the message, my heart was racing. I was aware that I ought to disregard it and should have informed him that we needed to maintain our distance, but I was unable to do so. While I was trying to stop myself from typing a response, I noticed that I had already done so. Indeed. Where is it? We got together in a tiny park that was located close to my residence. At the same time that the sun was beginning to set, throwing a warm warmth over the woods, I was experiencing a mixture of exhilaration and terror as I got closer to him. A solemn expression could be seen on his face as he leaned against a bench. He started by saying, "Emily," with a range of feelings in his voice. "I have made an effort to put some distance between myself and you, but I am unable to do so. It is imperative that you are aware of how much you mean to me." Despite the pain in my chest, I gazed up at him. "Andrew, this is just too difficult. What should I do? I am at a loss." To get a better look at my cheek, he moved closer to me and reached out with his hand. "Make it clear to me that you share my sentiments. That is all the information I require." My mind was racing with a tornado of contradictory feelings as I listened to him, and tears began to well up in my eyes. I was aware that this was inappropriate and that I ought to leave, but I was unable to do so. It was impossible to resist the draw, and the temptation was too overwhelming. "I do," I mumbled, my voice shaking slightly as I spoke. "However, this is far too difficult. I do not wish to cause harm to anyone." In a timid and gentle kiss, he moved in close to me and lightly brushed his lips against mine. He said, "I am aware of that. But I can't let you go, Emily," she said. The subsequent few hours were a jumble of feelings, including anxiety, remorse, and want. We were unable to resist the fascination that had been building up beneath the surface, and we became completely absorbed in the present moment. The experience was euphoric, but I knew it was wrong, and I was aware that the repercussions would be extremely severe. Following the conclusion of the event, we sat down on the bench, the realization of what we had done gradually taking hold of us. Despite the fact that I was filled with a profound sense of sorrow and regret, I also experienced a peculiar sensation of fulfillment. It was as if I had discovered something that had been absent from my life for such a long time. On the other hand, that feeling of satisfaction did not last long, since the consequences of our actions started to weigh heavily on me like a cloud of darkness. Considering everything that has transpired between us, how could I possibly continue my marriage? How could I face Ryan when he came home, knowing that I had crossed a line that should never have been crossed? As if sensing my turmoil, Andrew reached out and took my hand, his touch warm and comforting. "Emily, I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt you." "I know," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "But we've made a mess of things, Andrew. I don't know how to fix this." "We'll figure it out," he said softly, his thumb gently stroking the back of my hand. "I'm here for you, no matter what." But his words offered little comfort. The reality of our situation was too overwhelming, and I knew that there were no easy answers, no quick fixes. We had crossed a line, and there was no going back. It was some of the most challenging days of my life that followed the events that transpired. I tried to act normal, to focus on my marriage, but the guilt was eating me alive. Every time I thought about Ryan, I felt like a fraud, like I was living a lie. And the worst part was, I couldn't bring myself to end things with Andrew. Despite the guilt, despite the fear, I couldn't let go of the connection we had. But the longer our affair went on, the more complicated things became. The lies, the secrets, they were tearing me apart, and I knew that it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. That moment came one evening, when Ryan returned home unexpectedly from his trip. I had just finished dinner with Andrew, and we were sitting in my living room, talking quietly, when the front door suddenly opened. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest as Ryan stepped into the room, his eyes narrowing as he took in the scene before him. There was an uncomfortable silence, the air thick with tension, as Ryan looked from me to Andrew, suspicion flashing in his eyes. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice calm but laced with an edge of anger. "Ryan, it's not what you think," I began, my voice shaky. But I knew it was too late. The truth was written all over my face, and Ryan could see it. He stared at me for a long moment, his expression a mix of hurt and betrayal. "How could you do this to me, Emily? How could you betray me like this?" "I'm so sorry," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "I never meant for this to happen." Ryan shook his head, his eyes filled with a pain that cut me to the core. "I trusted you, both of you. And this is how you repay me." Andrew stood up, his expression one of regret. "Ryan, I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt you." But Ryan didn't want to hear it. "Get out," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. "Both of you. Get out of my house." I wanted to say something, to try and explain, but the words wouldn't come. I stood up on shaky legs, my heart breaking as I realized the full extent of what I had done. I had destroyed my marriage, and there was no way to fix it. As I left the house, I could hear Ryan's voice, filled with anger and pain, calling after us. "I never want to see either of you again." The next few weeks were a blur of pain and regret. I moved in with a friend, trying to give Ryan the space he needed to process everything that had happened. Andrew and I didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. The affair that had once brought us so much excitement had now left nothing but destruction in its wake. In the end, I knew that I had only myself to blame. I had let my emotions cloud my judgment, and I had made choices that I would regret for the rest of my life. The spark that I had been searching for had come at too high a price, and I had lost everything that truly mattered to me in the process. As I looked back on those weeks, I realized just how fragile relationships can be, how easily they can be shattered by a moment of weakness. And I knew that I would carry the weight of that knowledge with me for the rest of my life.